To the east of Madagascar, there is the small island nation of Mauritius, which hosts a unique mix of plant and animal life. Unfortunately, in its 500 years of human settlement, it's become famous for species going extinct, from the dodo's rapid disappearance to the loss of beetles in the past few decades. Luckily, years after these species disappeared, science can continue learning more through museomics, the study of DNA from museum collections. Today I'm going to focus on a few endangered or extinct species from the southern hemisphere. From the dodo's one-time island home on the forest floor, let's look up to the skies for another bird, the Mauritian kestrel. It's a type of falcon which eats geckos and smaller birds, and it's still around today. So why are researchers searching for them in museum archives? In a survey in 1974, only one female and 3 male kestrels were found. It was said to be the rarest bird in the world. Sources blame the use of DDT and the spread of egg-hungry monkeys. A breeding program began in Jersey, an island thousands of miles away in the English Channel. Gerald Durrell, a nature and travel writer, had founded a new zoo with what was a radical idea for the 1970s, a conservation program.
Your idea of a zoo wasn't the normal conventional one into which people just come and gawp at animals. You had this very deep conservation purpose always, didn't you?
I think they should play a much more important part in conservation, both by breeding threatened species in captivity and also by teaching people that, there are other forms of animal life that exist in the world with them.
After a visit to Mauritius in 1976, Durrell helped gather support between his zoo, the new Mauritian Wildlife Foundation, and other wildlife researchers, including members of the Peregrine Fund, which were handling a similar problem, rescuing peregrine falcons in the United States. But not long after the project started, a book, The Sinking Ark, argued that the kestrel might as well be abandoned, resources directed to conserving other birds in the region. Carl Jones, who had taken on the kestrel project for his master's research, was frustrated. Years later, he says, "Where does it end? You can't save rhinos, you can't save elephants. How much money is there in the world and how much is wasted on trivial things?" Into the 1980s, numbers in the wild were still very low. Carl Jones went to Durrell for advice. At the time, the conservation situation in Mauritius was dire, with many species about to disappear, and strong personalities and complex politics made the work difficult. Many felt that the approaches we were adopting to save the species were inappropriate. I was being overwhelmed by the conflict, and I discussed this with Jerry. He listened attentively, and after I had finished telling him of the challenges, he said that there was no quick fix, and that we'd have to sleep on the issues and tell me. By the next morning, he had sketched out a plan for how to move forward. A forest reserve was created in Mauritius, which is closed off to the public. This was later incorporated into Black River Gorges National Park. The island's kestrels are recovering today, but the population bottleneck had a lasting effect. In the 90s, the project reached their target population of 500 to 600 kestrels. In more recent years, the population has declined by half. In a recent paper, Conservation rescued the Mauritius kestrel from extinction, but not from genomic erosion. Scientists used the latest DNA extraction methods on museum specimens going back to the 1800s. They were able to map a more complete pangenome of the species and collect mitochondrial DNA, which is only inherited from the mother, allowing them to explore the full genetic diversity of the original kestrel population. Although the population has recovered some in numbers, they concluded that the species needs continued direct management. In 2022, the kestrel became the national bird of Mauritius. Now for the dodo. When settlers arrived on Mauritius in 1511, they found the dodo was an easy catch. It soon became the first species that people realized had been completely wiped out. This was long before modern science and preservation. Only a few specimens were ever collected, and of those, only a few skeletons and parts are around today. Most of what you think you know about dodos comes from pop culture, paintings and models, which make them look like Christmas turkeys, and were created by people who never saw one alive in its native habitat. The sailors who did see them draw them markedly more lifelike. One of the ongoing mysteries was when and how flightless birds got to these remote islands. Some scientists thought that the dodos were related to plovers, vultures, or even falcons. But by the 1800s, Most would put dodos with pigeons and doves in the family Columbidae. Luckily, in recent years, there has been advancements in sequencing so-called ancient DNA from the museum specimens.
Every day as I walked to work, I would pass by this gorgeous specimen and really want to grind up a bit of it and see whether it had any DNA. They, of course, told me, absolutely not. This is a very precious specimen, and you are a newbie and have no idea what you're doing. But after some years, after proving myself with some less important birds, I did have a chance.
The closest relative to the dodo was another extinct flightless bird, the solitaire, which lived on the nearby island of Rodriguez. In 2016, scientists used mitochondrial DNA to estimate relationships and found that the dodo and solitaire split 13 million years ago, before Mauritius and Rodriguez had even emerged from the ocean. The Dodo Genome Project also found a surprising, even more rare relative, the spotted green pigeon. Only 2 specimens of this bird were ever collected. Without records, the World Museum in Liverpool has been unable to figure out where it came from. It's thought to have been collected by Captain Cook's crew, and then the bird must have gone extinct wherever it lived in the wild. So for over 200 years, biologists have been trying to learn something from this one bird, and now in our lifetimes, DNA technology has become available. What a time to be alive, or extinct. The museum guards the specimen carefully. The specimen is kept in a locked cabinet with the other especially important specimens such as other extinct birds and birds which were used as the basis of the first scientific descriptions. We monitor the store for pests and try to maintain the environmental conditions in the storeroom at a stable temperature and humidity to prevent pest infestations and damp. When the pigeon is taken out for researchers or visitors to see, we handle it very carefully with gloves and try to limit exposure to light. When the DNA results were published in 2014, scientists noted that the dodo and solitaire were relatives, but the closest relative was the Nicobar pigeon. This validates, in part, a famed German ornithologist, Johann Georg Wagler, who suggested that it was a juvenile Nicobar pigeon back in 1827. This doesn't mean that the pigeon lived in the Andaman or Nicobar Islands, but maybe points to an Indian Ocean or South Pacific home. Unfortunately, we may not learn much more than that without finding fossils on the ground. On the other side of Africa, in the South Atlantic, there's a smaller, even more isolated island, which is still British territory. Saint Helena was also home to several endemic birds and plants, some now extinct. Colonists had brought goats, which foraged freely across the island and eliminated plants, nibble by nibble. In November 1980, a botanist named Kenton Cronk arrived on the island in search of a plant from the genus Trochidopsis. As far back as 1850, writers had said that this species was extinct. Joined by local conservation officer George Benjamin, they climbed up to the steepest cliffs where the goats have not reached. When Cronk became director of the Beatty Museum in Vancouver, decades later, he described what they found.
We pored over maps and talked to old timers about where people had found old bits of wood of the Saint Helena ebony, trying to track down where it once grew. And eventually, bingo, we saw on a cliff a plant matching the description because it was a very steep and dangerous cliff. He had tied one specimen he had in his sweater and tied it around his waist, and he had another specimen between his teeth.
After bringing cuttings to Kew Gardens and comparing them to specimens from herbariums at the British Museum in Oxford, in the 1990s, Cronk realized that these centuries-old archives held 3 distinct species, not 2. One remained cultivated on St. Helena in small numbers, one had unfortunately gone fully extinct, and he was recognizing and describing the third for the first time. Restoring the Saint Helena ebony has become a success story. In 1999, the Islanders began the Millennium Forest Project, where thousands of residents have helped plant endemic species, including the ebony. They remain cautious about creating hybrids by planting endemic species too close together. This was a success that came out of the original archives, but research continues. Now botanists are exploring digital archives and sequencing DNA of plant specimens going back to the 1700s. Here, Annabelle DeVry shows the age of some samples and where hybrids were existing on the island hundreds of years ago.
And these groups we thought were kind of over time changes in the population, but we now think that it might be more to do with space, so that these were different populations across Saint Helena.
Kenton Kronk has returned to Saint Helena at times to help them collaborate with Kew Gardens, and there's now a seed bank to keep the island's endemic plants into the far future. Seed banks and other participatory conservation programs have the potential to keep biodiversity alive in places around the world. We shouldn't overlook local museums and botanical gardens, which could be holding on to historical treasures. Do you have one in your area, and have they looked into DNA sequencing? If so, please leave a comment. I hope that this museomics trend spreads and gives us new insights. This was the latest video for my Science and History channel. It's made by a real person, not an AI. If you like and subscribe, that does a lot to help this channel keep going. Thanks for watching.